Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do the second part of my wrap up from February, and that is to look at the books that I read as part of Fitzuary, which is a pun that I still find a lot of joy from. But that is reading sort of books that I had kind of lying around, as it were, from Fitzcarraldo Press, who are UK based, but do kind of a lot of really great work with amazing books from sort of all over the place. So some of them are translation, some of them are sort of written in English, some of them are sort of older books that have sort of been brought back, some of them are non-fiction, and so it sort of led to this sort of interesting little range of books that I read this month. And I've spoken about some of them separately in a video about Annie Ernaux, but I'm just going to very quickly touch on a couple of those first, which is just the absolute joy that is discovering Annie Ernaux's work in English. So she's a French writer. She largely writes non-fiction and writes sort of a bit of a mixture, and so her work often sort of feels like it's sort of split into sort of two camps, at least that I've experienced. One of which is sort of a very personal thing, talking about her family, talking about her own experiences, and a second part that is sort of almost watching through her window as the sort of the country and the world changes, and so you see that and sometimes sort of overlap a little bit, where she often likes to sort of talk about the historical context of everything that's going on around her, and sort of global context, but often she brings it back to some quite personal experiences. So the two I've got here in sort of physical copy sort of do that quite well. So A Girl's Story talks about her own experiences as a young girl, and sort of particularly kind of growing up, and a lot of the kinds of questions that she'd be having around that time, and so that's sort of really interesting and kind of is a very personal story, whereas something like Exteriors is in some ways a little bit more about the external world, as you might be able to tell from the title. So looking at kind of things like the growing distrust of outsiders. So kind of the Exteriors here is sort of a title that plays on both. So both people who are kind of deemed outsiders in society, but also the exterior details that we notice about people as we walk around, and kind of observing people that way. But I found both so interesting in the rest of her books that I read this month. The rest of them I got from the library, which is why I don't have them physically here at the moment, because I gave them back. But The Years is probably her most famous work, at least to sort of an English-speaking audience. It was shortlisted for the International Booker as well, and that book is just phenomenal, I think, at really combining the two of sort of talking about some personal experiences, but then really charting how that looks across the sort of history of France and of the world, sort of going through the sort of the 50s to the sort of early 2000s. So really interesting, and I'm so glad that she's been given a voice to, you know, a kind of a chance to sort of be discovered by an English-speaking audience. Next, I'm going to move on to the fiction books, and you'll notice there's sort of colour change. So non-fiction tends to be in white, and the covers of the fiction tends to be in blue. There are some books that kind of straddle that line really interestingly, yeah. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about these. So one that I was really excited to read and really greatly enjoyed was Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. So she is, ooh, what's this that fell out? Oh, okay. I was using this as a bookmark, and apparently it's just like a kind of coffee stamp card from the London Review Bookshop. There we go. That shows you what I was doing. But this book I thought was really interesting. This it covers this story of a woman who is sort of in her, I believe in her 60s or sort of late 50s. And she's in many ways an outcast in the society around her. She sees things happening that maybe others don't, and sometimes we're led to believe that maybe it's an overactive imagination. Sometimes we are meant to sort of see that she is really sort of telling the truth, and that's, for me, where the magic of this book came, particularly at the end. I think earlier on I was sort of struggling to really find a foothold in this book, particularly as the sort of character sort of goes through her various beliefs on environmentalism and animal rights and astrology and her love of poetry, particularly, I think, is it Blake? Which is where the title, yes, where the title of this book comes from. But then actually towards the end we start to see how dangerous it is when people like her are excluded from the world, and as a result, her being an outsider means that she sees things and can kind of try to work out what's been happening around this sort of village better than anybody else. But at the same time, you can see how the sensitivity almost of someone like her doesn't fit with a kind of a police force or a kind of structure that is quite sort of, I suppose, masculine or quite authoritative, and her sort of more compassionate outlook is sort of trampled upon, really. And I just thought this was so interesting as a book. I really want to read more of hers. I've read Primeval and Other Stories, which I really enjoyed. I haven't fully found a proper foothold with her yet as an author. I've got Flights and the Books of Jacob to read at some point, which are her longer ones, particularly Books of Jacob, which is about 900 pages. But I am really, really looking forward to reading a few more of her books, because I get the feeling that I'm going to really enjoy her as an author. I just think I need to read a few more of hers and kind of I think I'm slowly warming up to what it is that she does and how she does it, and I'm enjoying what I'm seeing so far. Next up, and brand new out this year and this month, well, in February, is Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. And I really enjoy this. I thought this was really beautiful and stunning. It's this sort of, it almost reads as non-fiction at times, because it's this sort of tale of this woman watching, sort of talking to her mother and, sort of reflecting on various parts of her life and talking about going on holiday and these sort of little observations. And the love that comes through between these characters is so palpable throughout this book, but it's done in this really sort of almost meandering kind of flowy style. Like it never really has a proper linear story that's sort of like this happened and then this and then this. It revolves a lot around little flashbacks and little moments and thoughts on things and observations, and so as a result we get this really sort of patchwork novel. And it's only, it's under 100 pages. It's a really little one, and it won the Fitzcarraldo sort of novel prize. So it's sort of a prize open to submission, and then these, the books get published. And I can totally see why. The previous winner of this being Box Hill by Adam Mars-Jones, which is a book I love, and I just thought this was such a charming book. I was on a long coach journey and just sort of read the whole thing start to finish, because it doesn't take long, it's about 100 pages, and was just really sort of taken away by the sort of that really slow, gentle style that it has. So yeah, I thought there was something really quite special about this. I think I did want maybe a bit more. I think I maybe wanted a slightly longer version of the novel, which, criticising a novel for what it isn't always feels a bit weird, but I still think overall this book was so beautiful, and I'm really excited to see what she does next as an author, because I think this is her debut, I want to say, and I'll be really excited to see more of her work, just because I think her style is so gorgeous. Also joining the Fitzuary fun was a little read-along of Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, which is hard going, again about 100 pages long. Fitzcarraldo is really quite good at finding these little kind of short books, as well as some big chunkers as well. But Minor Detail is a story, just sort of the explanation of it kind of taking place around Palestine, and particularly around the sort of after effects of war, probably tells you enough about what's probably, that this is not going to be the light happy book. But I think it's really interesting. It's split into two parts. The first part being almost to show you the desensitization. We're shown sort of inside the head of a soldier or kind of military person of some sort, and he is so sort of routine and regimented and almost uncaring, to an extent that we start to kind of really feel it's a really hard slog at the beginning, almost, because of these first 40-50 pages are just about this routine, about this sort of almost very logical sort of point of view, almost the point of uncaring, and so when we get to the second part, we kind of hear about a woman trapped in the middle of this war, and in the middle of sort of things happening, we realise just how horrible everything is. And it's not an easy read by any means, but I think a really beautiful and powerful one at the same time. I think it's really well done in terms of how it approaches this, and in terms of the way it structures this, but don't be put off by the initial 40 or 50 pages, because I think you need that to get the context for the second half, even if that does feel a little bit off-putting at first. But yeah, that was one. And lastly, and last but not least, I only very recently finished this. This is Dark Neighbourhood by Vanessa Onwuemezi. And this is a debut collection of short stories, which has also been shortlisted for or longlisted, I should say, for the Republic of Consciousness Prize, which is a prize for independent presses, of which obviously Fitzcarraldo is one. And yeah, I sometimes struggled with sort of finding a foothold in some of these short stories just because they are so off the wall, and I almost feel like this is a book that I need either as an audiobook or, even better, as sort of part of like almost like a theatre experience. I think I need to be in like a darkened room hearing somebody perform these instead of just sort of reading an audiobook, if that makes sense. I kind of, because these feel like there are some parts of some of the pages feel almost like spoken word poetry, it's kind of got this rhythm and this sort of line break kind of quality that feels really like performance poetry. But I just sometimes sort of, I struggle a bit with short stories anyway. I think sometimes I was lost about what was actually happening in the short stories. Sometimes I didn't care because the language was so beautiful and it was such a specific mood and specific feel that I was kind of just into this and sort of ready for it regardless. So I still think a really beautiful set of stories, and I totally see why it's on the Republic of Consciousness long list. I'm really excited to read the rest of that long list now as well. And so I'm just really excited to see how this book does. I wouldn't be surprised in some ways if it makes it onto the shortlist, because I think it's so unique and interesting. So yeah, really excited to check out more. But those have been the books that I read for Fitzuary, as well as some other Ernaux that are not here because they were from the library. But it's been really interesting to sort of dive into a specific press almost and kind of focus in that way, just because I think it's interesting to see just the diversity that happens within one press. And obviously Fitzcarraldo releases a lot of books, especially compared to a lot of small presses who maybe put out, two to five or whatever per year, but Fitzcarraldo really gets those out, and it's really impressive. These are wonderful books, and I really highly urge you to check them out. I'm really keen to read a bit more of Olga Tokarczuk. I've got books of Jacob. Is it there behind me? No, I don't think it's somewhere over here. I think in my room, just outside. But I am really excited to read Flights and Books of Jacob, even if that might kill me with the amount of pages. But nonetheless, exciting to see such brilliant books being published. I've been Bob, rambling about books, and take care and speak to you all soon. I hope you've had a wonderful reading month. Bye bye.